Let's talk about the time a simple, beautiful flower literally broke an entire country's economy. It is one of the wildest, most fascinating economic bubbles in all of history. We're going to dig into the absolute madness, the spectacular crash, and what this 400-year-old story can teach us right now. Okay, just picture this for a second. You walk into a room and you trade the deed to your nice four-bedroom family home, not for gold, not for a piece of land, but for one single plant bulb. A bulb that hasn't even grown into a flower yet. Sounds completely crazy, right? Well, in the Netherlands, back in 1637, some of the smartest, wealthiest people in the world were doing exactly that. So how on earth did things get so out of hand? Well, first, you gotta understand the time and place. The Dutch Republic in the 1600s, they were on top of the world. It was the wealthiest, most innovative nation on the planet. Think of it like the Silicon Valley of its day. And into this world of new money and high society, the tulip arrives from the Ottoman Empire, and it instantly becomes the ultimate status symbol. It was the luxury item you had to have. But here is where it gets really interesting. Every once in a while, a normal, plain-colored tulip would suddenly just break. It would sprout these incredible, unpredictable, flame-like stripes. To the Dutch, this was a miracle from God. It was like a living work of art. Of course, we know now it was actually a virus infecting the plant, but they didn't know that. All they saw was something unique and priceless. Now let's talk about rarity. I mean, extreme rarity. At the absolute peak of all this craziness, the holy grail, the Mona Lisa of all tulips, was the Semper Augustus. And at one point, it was believed there were only 12, that's 1, 2, of these bulbs on the entire planet. And when you have that kind of scarcity, well, the demand just goes through the roof. And that demand? Well, it led to a price tag that is just mind-blowing. By 1636, a single Semper Augustus bulb was going for 5,500 guilders. Now that's just a number to us, so let's put it into perspective. So what does 5,500 guilders actually mean? Well, think about it like this. A master carpenter, a highly skilled, well-paid professional, he made about 250 guilders in a whole year of hard work. That means he would have to work for 22 straight years and not spend a single penny on food or housing or anything just to afford one flower bulb. Okay, so for a while, this was just a game for the super rich, right? But then a new financial invention came along that changed everything. It took this niche obsession and spread it like wildfire through every single level of society. The Dutch came up with something they called windhandel. It literally translates to wind trade. See, the actual bulbs are in the ground during the winter, so you couldn't trade them. So instead, people started buying and selling paper contracts, basically IOUs, that promised them a tulip bulb come summertime. No actual flowers were changing hands, just slips of paper. You weren't buying a tulip, you were buying a promise. And this, my friends, was the birth of the futures market, and it poured gasoline on the fire. And just like that, the floodgates opened. Suddenly, everybody could get in on the action. We're talking chimney sweeps, sailors, farmhands, people who had probably never even seen one of these fancy tulips in their life. They were mortgaging their family homes, selling off the very tools they needed to do their jobs, all to buy a piece of paper. The goal wasn't to own a flower. The goal was to flip that paper to someone else next week for a quick profit. If you want one story that perfectly captures how disconnected from reality things have become, you have to hear about the sailor. So this sailor, he delivers some goods to a rich merchant, and he sees what he thinks is an onion sitting on the counter. So he grabs it, peels it, and eats it with his breakfast. Yeah, turns out that onion was a Semper Augustus bulb. The merchant lost a fortune, and that poor sailor was thrown in a dungeon for felony larceny. One man's snack was literally another man's life-saving. You know, a party like this can't last forever. A market that's built on nothing but promises and the belief that prices will always go up, well, eventually it has to find its breaking point. And for the Dutch tulip market, that moment came on a cold morning in a tavern in a city called Haarlem. So to really get what happened next, you have to understand the psychology that was driving this whole thing. It's called the greater fool's theory, and the logic is dangerously simple. It doesn't matter how much you pay for something, even if it's a ridiculous price, as long as you're sure you can find a greater fool who's willing to pay you even more for it later on. The entire system is built on finding the next fool in line. So picture it. February 3rd, 1637. It's a routine auction for tulip contracts. A trader stands up, offers a batch for 1,250 guilders. A high price, sure, but nothing unusual. But instead of the usual frenzy of bids, he got nothing. Just silence. He gets a little nervous.
drops the price to 1,100. Still silence. He tries again, desperate now, 1,000 guilders. And the silence in that room was absolutely deafening. And in that one deafeningly quiet moment, everybody in that tavern, and soon everybody in the entire country, had the exact same horrifying thought all at once. The person they were counting on to buy their contract wasn't there. They had finally run out of fools. And panic didn't just walk into the room, it kicked down the door. The crash was just as fast and spectacular as the climb, maybe even faster. Within days, the entire market for these tulip contracts just evaporated. People who had gone to bed feeling like the richest people in the world woke up holding nothing but worthless pieces of paper. And the fallout was brutal. The government, they basically just said, "You were gambling, this is not our problem." There was no bailout. Thousands of people who were rich on paper were now completely wiped out. Families lost homes they had owned for generations. But maybe the worst part was that trust in society was just shattered. Your neighbor who you'd been celebrating with last week was now the person who'd sold you a piece of wind. And you want to know the ultimate irony in all of this? The real kicker? Years later, scientists figured out that those beautiful flame-like patterns, the very thing that made the tulips so valuable, it was a symptom of a virus, a disease that was actually weakening the bulb and eventually killing the plant. The very source of all that incredible value was, in fact, a fatal flaw. Okay, so why are we talking about a 400-year-old flower story? Why does this still matter? Because Tulip Mania was never really about flowers. It was a spectacular front-row seat to the failures of human psychology. And those same psychological traps, well, they're still set for us today. You know, the legendary investor Charlie Munger had a perfect quote for this. He said, "Every bubble has a needle waiting for it." No matter how exciting it feels, no matter how much people say this time it's different, the laws of financial gravity always, always win. Tulip Mania puts two of our biggest mental bugs under a microscope. First, there's social proof. That's just our brain saying, hey, if everyone is buying tulips, it must be the smart thing to do. And second, we mistake liquidity for value. We think that just because you can sell something easily for a high price, it must actually be worth that price. But those are two very different things. Look, history doesn't exactly repeat itself, but man, does it rhyme. The exact same patterns of crowd madness, of easy money, of that dangerous, this time it's different thinking. You see it in the dot-com bubble in 2000, you see it in the housing crash of 2008. The product changes, but the human behavior, it stays exactly the same. And that brings it all back to you, right here, right now. It's really easy for us to look back 400 years and laugh at those silly Dutch people trading their houses for flowers. It's a lot harder to turn that critical eye on ourselves, on our own investments, on the things we believe in. So the real question this whole story leaves us with is a very personal one. Are you holding a tulip right now?